This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this. Hello everyone and welcome to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. My name is Kurt North and welcome to our continuing coverage of Season 6 of the X-Files. Joining me as always are guests and we have two this week in the form of Marlene Stemme. Hi Marlene, how are you doing?
Hey Kurt, I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Actually, if I'm being honest with you, I'm sweltering. I don't know what we've done with the heating, but I feel like I'm in a sauna. Which is probably not the best thing to do in the middle of winter. So right. I might have to get that checked out once we finish this podcast. But yeah, I'm other than that, I'm doing fine. We're currently in our third lockdown, and I'm back to working in my petrol station and looking after the staff on there. So it feels eerily like back in April last year. So yeah, other than that, doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm in my third shutdown from my work. So kind of a somewhat similar situation, a little bit of a rewind to last March for me. Yeah. Not doing poorly though.
No. I mean, it gives me more time to think. I'm just about to start a new WandaVision podcast, which, you know, if you get stuck doing stuff, let's think of another podcast to do. That's the way I look at it anyway.
That's the boon of the lockdown and or business shutdown, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've also got joining us Katie Doe. Katie, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing very well, considering.
Yeah, good. Well, what I've got the pleasure of doing is doing this podcast because you're the guests you've been on the show before. Marlene, you've of course run a lot of the roundtables and stuff, and you also have hosted the show earlier in the season. Katie, you were on Fight the Future and obviously have been on roundtables, but you both haven't been on as a guest on the main episodes, have you?
No, this is very exciting.
No.
We do get to do that thing called the 5 questions of X. So, bearing in mind we've got the episode to do as well, and two of you to do that, I think we should maybe delve into that now and let's see how we fare and get some knowledge on your X-Files world. So I think we'll start with Marlene. So Marlene, okay. Where did you discover the X-Files? What was your first episode you saw?
So the first episode I saw was Too Shy. And the way that this happened is that I had several friends in college that were telling me about the X-Files. And a couple of these friends were people that liked very sort of traditional sci-fi, I would say. And I didn't consider myself, really a sci-fi person. And I don't know, just from what they had said, I was like, well, that sounds interesting. But they didn't go into detail and didn't necessarily seem like something that would float my boat. And then like more of my friends over like the year or so kept mentioning it. I'm like, well, that's interesting. But see, I watched Picket Fences at the time. I had started watching that in high school, and Picket Fences had moved to Fridays in the same time slot as the X-Files during the beginning of the X-Files season 3. So one night, I don't know, Picket Fences must not have been on. And so I went to a viewing party at a friend's apartment and we watched Too Shy. And even though like it was a little bit gory for my taste, I was still kind of drawn into it and like very compelled by Mulder and Scully working on the case and so forth. And so I thought, well, I like this. I'm going to give this a try. And then the next night, the Fox Network was supposed to show a Tyson Holyfield fight, a boxing match, but it was canceled. So Fox reran Squeeze and Tombs. So I kind of had this like double feature experience where I was able to watch the show again the next night. The first episode, Squeeze, by myself, I remember thinking it was scary then. I don't necessarily now because, we've all seen them a number of times. But at the time, I was like, oh, this is kind of spooky. And, I enjoyed that. And then I watched Tombs with the same friend that had like managed to get me into the show. So that's how it started. And then it just kind of kept on from there. That winter, I went on a foreign study trip with school, and I had a friend, record on the old VHS tapes all of the X-Files that I was going to miss when I was on this trip. So I definitely was hooked by that point.
Oh, good stuff. I mean, it's similar in some ways to my story because obviously the seeing seeing Lazarus and not getting really to see much of season 2, and season 2 and season 3 were a bit of a blur. But the videos came out on Tombs and Squeeze were the first ones I saw from season 1. So, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of a, because of the VHSs that came out at the time, that's probably a lot of people's stories. But what about you, Katie, then? So how did you first discover? Did you see it at the very first premiere, or did you catch it later in the show's run?
No, not the very beginning. Kind of in the middle of the show. I saw it just really by chance. We were on summer vacation. The whole family was there, and my uncle just happened to turn on the TV and start watching The X-Files, and it was Quagmire. So my sister and I started watching. We watched the whole episode, and I didn't really know much of anything about the show. I knew, kind of the basic premise, but I didn't know any details or anything. But we watched the whole episode through, and I just loved it. The characters really got me, and that's like a pretty good episode for, Mulder and Scully, banter and connection. So I think that's what really got me. And I'm really surprised, too, because usually my one rule is I don't watch anything where any kind of animal gets killed or eaten or anything. So I liked it even though Queequeg got eaten. So that's, that's a pretty strong endorsement of it.
That's a strong exception as well.
It is, yeah. Poor little guy.
Poor Queequeg.
I know. But so we spent that summer kind of, trying to catch up. We recorded all the episodes we could find on VHS. So we did that whole thing. And FX at that time was doing their, nightly reruns. And I think Fox still had reruns too. So I caught up pretty fast in kind of a piecemeal way. But, the storyline did kind of make sense to me the way I watched it. Right. And then that fall. So that would have been 1997 because that fall was the season 5 premiere. So I was pretty much caught up by then. And then went through real time.
That was so fun having to go out and find the episodes.
Wasn't it?
And get the tapes and so forth. I think that's something that we missed.
You had to look at TV Guide sometimes, you couldn't find the episode title, and after that I started looking at, the message boards and things, but it was a lot of work.
It was work. It really was.
Yeah, and I still have those tapes. I have all the labels and everything, and
oh man, I got rid of some of mine one time when I was trying to declutter, and I really regret it. But anyway.
It's a nice memory.
I used to label mine by points. It used to be 1.1, 1.2, 1.3,
okay.
2.1, so all kinds. But talking of looking at things out of order, I didn't see the abduction arc until after I saw Anasazi. So there's elements of that where it's right, that's what happened. So that was the way I kind of watched it, because Anasazi came out as a VHS, and was premiere in the season 3 premiere, which obviously had been out in America but hadn't been over here, and it was an exclusive. So it was by the time I got round to that point, it was okay, I'm going to watch this 3-parter, which obviously became one of my favorites ever.
Yeah, how could it not?
And then the next, exactly.
Right.
And the other file, the VHS, was the abduction arc, so it was watching them in a bit of a higgledy-piggledy way as well. So Marlene, favorite episode? What would you class as your favorite episode of the show?
Milagro is my favorite episode. I think it's atypical for an X-File, but I've always loved it. I love the kind of the interiority of Scully that they're trying to get to, and whether or not they really get to that or not. I like that it's like a different sort of dark love story. And I like that it takes place kind of in a very, it's a constrained series of sets. It's almost like a play. And I don't know, there's just something that's perfect about it to me, even though there's not, a lot of the sort of typical X-File things. It's so character based, and I'm not a shipper, but I think it's romantic, kind of in a spiritual way. I don't mean that sounds fluffy, but I just think that the entire thing about, creation and destruction, all of that really appeals to me. So that's my extremely short answer, because I could probably turn it into a Milagro podcast if I keep going on about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, before that, I will say it was Pusher for quite a while until I hit Milagro, and then it's never changed from Milagro.
So what about yourself then, Katie? What would you think as your favorite? I know it's such a hard question, but what would you consider to be your favorite?
This particular question wasn't that hard, because I always say Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose.
Right.
For me too, though, Pusher is a very, very, very close second. But yeah, I've got to go Clyde Bruckman. It's just perfect. The melancholy, sort of tragic tone of it, the really dark humor. Peter Boyle's fantastic. Mulder and Scully are fantastic. I especially love Scully and Bruckman together, their relationship. And yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. Well, I think that may come up in our discussions today.
Yes, definitely. Definitely in my notes.
So I'll leave my Clyde Bruckman thoughts to a bit later. What about your favourite season then, Marlene? What would you class as your favourite season?
My favorite season is season 3. And I don't know if there's some influence that was the first season that I started watching. I tend to pick up on shows. I haven't watched anything in years, but I've noticed that I pick up in season 3 on a lot of TV shows. But it's definitely season 3. I feel like they hit a point when it was, I don't want to say popular enough that they had, some resources and so forth to maybe edge up some of the quality of the filming. Not that there's anything wrong with seasons 1 and 2, but it was just, to me, it was at that point before it became really popular. There's just an earnestness about it. It's like where it was still very earnest, but it also was a little bit more developed, I guess, both in the characters and the look of the show and everything. And I just think the main thing is that the episodes that year are of such, I'm going to say, uniform high quality overall. And Clyde Bruckman is one of the ones I would put in that category. I mean, you have like the 3 Darren Morgan episodes. So they kind of like on their own set that season apart. But even the mythology, it's before it got to be really sort of big and international. It was not small anymore, but it was just kind of starting to build itself. And I think that was, to me, the year that it had the most intrigue probably. And then all of the individual episodes I thought were very, just like interesting, and then they seemed well researched too. Like all of them, or not, I don't say all, but like most of the phenomenon made sense, and I just liked the way that Mulder and Scully were as characters. I think probably the best at that time.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of that. For me, being a mythology fan, I think season 3's got its strongest. I've been through this before, but there's the strongest run of episodes. As I say, with Apocrypha and Nicene 731, and obviously the Anasazi stuff, and it's just got so much wealth to it, and on top of that, as I say, some of the finest episodes in the run. Jose Chung's Outer Space is obviously my favorite episode, so it's got a lot going for it. Season 3, and season 3, season 4 is generally the kind of, if you put a poll out there, they'll be up there with 3, 4, and 5 as the main heights of the show, really. What about yourself then, Katie? What do you think is your favorite season?
I'm going to give a short answer and say season 3 for pretty much all of the reasons Marlene gave and that you gave. Yeah, same thing. I love the myth arc of it. I think Nisei in 731, I think, is my favorite mythology 2-parter. Darren Morgan's episodes. Yeah, it's just, the whole thing just holds together so well. And
right.
There's not really any episode that I would skip. So, there's only a handful I would say are kind of like not really, really great, but still totally watchable. And like the whole thing just, from start to finish, it's kind of a perfect season of television.
And it's entertaining too. Like even the ones that, that I would think are not as that are not as great as episodes, they're still kind of fun to watch.
They are,
so,
yeah.
There might be maybe 1 or 2 that you might want to skip, but that's for a different podcast.
Right.
Okay, favorite moment then can be something huge, can be something really, really small. Marlene, what do you think is your favorite moment?
There's so many. There's so many that I like, and there's so many conversations. We did a roundtable on conversations, but those are, I guess, more than moments. I've always liked it's a moment in This Is Not Happening, season 8, which I'm not a big proponent of this. It's not the season. It's not even the episode necessarily, but it's the moment when Scully sees sort of like the apparition of Mulder at the window. Like she's trying to turn on the light and the light won't turn on, and she looks and sees him there.
Yeah.
And then he disappears. There's just something about that was kind of, it was just so fleeting, but it was very revelatory. I don't know. I think it's, I don't even want to interpret it. It was just something about that moment that has always stuck with me as my favorite.
Excellent. Katie?
Okay.
Go on, carry on. No, if you want to add an extra moment.
No, I was just going to say there are moments in the Russian roulette scene when we're like, talking about Pusher, that I think, that's the thing I notice. Every time I watch it, I'm concerned that Mulder is going to shoot Scully, even though I know that, through many viewings that's not going to happen. That sense of anxiety is still palpable each time I see it. So I would put that in there as well for that reason. But it's my favorite, definitely, like the most momentous to me is that small moment, and this is not happening. But I also think about the Russian roulette scene in Pusher.
Great stuff. And Katie, what would you see as your favourite moment? Can be anything. Can be something as small as a hand touch to, you know, something as large as a massive UFO crashing in the Antarctic.
It's such a broad range. I have a bunch.
Yeah,
I've got a bunch of them, but I think I would have to pick the ending of Anasazi when Mulder is on the phone with Scully, and he's in the train car, and they're talking about what she's finding in the files, and he has that line, like, "My God, Scully, what have they done?" And then the door on top of the train car slams shut. It's just like that punctuating moment after their realization that this huge conspiracy is happening. And I think, I love that. It gives me shivers every time.
Yeah, and Scully's monologue right before that on the call, isn't it? Where it's like Axis power scientists giving amnesty after the war and all that kind of thing. And you know,
that's so well done, that entire thing.
It is, yeah. It's one of my defining moments actually for watching the show. It's the one that sticks out to me most in any episode, really. I think that purely because the unopened file was pretty much the first video I got. I wore that film. I wore those 2 hours, 10 minutes out. It was literally on repeat. So more than anything, I think Jose Chung's probably tipped it now. But more than anything, I think that 3-parter, I think I've watched the most. You know, and it's not, I wouldn't define it as my favourite moment, but it's such a great moment in time. And it's also on the Mark Snow score CD as well, that moment. And, you know, that along with Dwayne Barry's Drill Holes My Damn Teeth section, and the CD reminds me so much of it. So that's great. Marlene then, okay, character. Mulder, Scully, could be Donny Faster, it could be, you know, absolutely anyone you like. It could be even, someone who's only been in it for 20 seconds. Who would you consider to be your favourite character?
Oh, wow, okay. I'm sure there are a lot of like the sort of bit part characters that I could pick. And I do have one secondary character, but by far it's definitely Scully. It's definitely Scully, because I heard Chris Carter one time talk about the inbuilt character conflicts that both Mulder and Scully had between sort of reason and faith. And I really liked that description. And I think for Scully, because she's got this sort of skeptical, you know, scientific mindset, and then she has her own religious faith. And I think for her, it's a stronger conflict than what we see in Mulder. And I think that's part of what makes her interesting. I wouldn't just say she's interesting because of these, you know, categories that she's in, but I think that the way that really propels her character, that the tension between those things, and just like what comes from that, even like emotionally or logically, anything like that, just makes her a really interesting character. And I don't know, I think it's to me, she's a unique female character for her personality. I'm not so concerned about, you know, her external role in society and that sort of thing, just because that's great, but my interest is just more in how her personality works, I guess. So yeah, Scully for that reason. You know, my side character would be the well-manicured man, and it's mainly just because his line delivery was like never a miss. You know, everything he said was just what we would, and I think in this country, in the United States, we would consider it properly British. It's sort of
my God,
funny. And exactly. You do a good, well-manicured man. And I just always enjoyed him.
Yeah, as a northerner, you know, I'm not quite RP English, but you know, at least I'm somewhere close. Okay, then. So, Katie, who would you consider to be your favorite character of the show?
This was my hardest question. I find it really hard to separate Mulder and Scully as like totally separate characters to pick a favorite. I mean, I probably would go for Scully a little bit more over Mulder, but like them together, I think just that dynamic they make up this just fantastic dichotomy. But like you were saying too, Marlene, like all those qualities of Scully, those are definitely what draw me in. So I guess I would say Scully as the main choice, but I do have a second. But it's a tie. It's Skinner, X, or the well-manicured man. It depends on the episode.
I like your Mulder and Scully analysis, though, as a character. I agree with that it's that dynamic between them that's kind of its own character.
I mean, do you want to include Alex Krycek and anyone else while you're at it? Or just those three as secondaries? Or?
I'll put him in. I'll put the lone gunman in. Yeah, it's tough.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. Well, that's it. Those are your 5 questions. So, you are now fully inducted into the XCast universe. And
all right.
You know, I know Marlene was pre-approved. So,
Right.
but it's all good.
It's only been like 2.5 years, you know.
Well, exactly. You know, it's a long-standing gold membership account, I think, Marlene. I think.
Okay.
But yeah, so let's start talking about this episode, which is going to be Tithonus, and we should go and do that now. Okay, so this week is episode number 10, and it is Tithonus, and we have a episode that was written by Vince Gilligan, directed by Michael W. Watkins, and originally aired on the 24th of January 1999. Before we get into the episode as a whole, I think we need to maybe talk about just the concept of this episode, because it's based off 3 different elements that Vince Gilligan has talked about. We've got the Ouija, which is Arthur Felig, who was a well-known photographer. He used to do black and white photographs in the 30s and 40s, and he used to follow the city emergency services around, and kind of got quite well known. And I think he moved over to London at one point as well. So he was he became well kind of known for things like looking at the crime and death and all that kind of thing. And obviously, you know, our main character in Felig is very much based on that. The other 2 things are obviously the title, Tithonus, you know, the Greek mythology, which I'm sure we can talk about, but also the final thing was the yellow fever as well. So mixing these 3 episodes, these kind of 3 stories up together, Marlene, what do you make to that? And if you just want to give me your your kind of view on the episode itself and what you would rate it out of 10 for me as well, and then we'll continue on.
Okay. I think Vince Gilligan, and then I guess the writers, you know, from what I've read, were trying to come up with a story on immortality for a while, and then kind of hit on this idea of a photographer that was trying to chase death, I suppose. And I really think that Vince Gilligan did a good job sort of weaving together the 3 elements that you mentioned. And it's not just in the narrative, but also in the tone of it, because I think he really got that tone of sort of almost like a longing for death that, you know, and this is like, what is the price of immortality? Because I guess in Tithonus, from my understanding, when Tithonus became immortal, his I guess it was like the goddess that was in love with him that asked Zeus to make him immortal didn't ask that he also have eternal youth. So he kind of grew old and withered. Yeah. And I think that that's really well conveyed with Alfred Felig in this, and just the discussion that he has with Scully about like life and how long, you know, life is worth living and how long love lasts and those sorts of things. And just weaving that in with photography, I think was so well done, because there's a creepy element to photography, especially when you're looking at that kind of, you know, film photography and darkroom photography, you know, and I think that was fascinating the way they did that. And then the story of, you know, Arthur Felig, the original photographer, seems to be almost, you know, kind of a veridical account in some ways to what Vince Gilligan did with Alfred Felig and following the, like being a stringer for the wire service and sort of following the emergency services around and that type of thing. I think that all of that was, you know, worked in the story well. And then the yellow fever part of it, I think, was just a very well told story by Alfred Felig once we get to that part of the episode. And I think that's the main part, is sort of like this, you know, when Scully asked what caused this or how he became like this, that's really the only time that I can pick out that aside from the fact that they're in, you know, New York, but other than that, it's the only time when yellow fever really becomes part of the plot. And I think that it's important and it becomes poignant just because he does such a wonderful job describing almost like the sensory elements of that time and what that would have been like in his experience. So all told, I think that those things, you know, mesh together very well. And out of 10, if we have to get like in half points rather than being like really nitpicky, I guess I would give it a 9.
Okay.
Somewhere between a 9 and a 9.5, but I would say a 9 out of 10.
Well, that's very high praise indeed, 9.5. So, Katie, what do you actually make to the episode then? Because, we've got those three elements as Marlene's quite distinctly put that there with the way it melds in. But we've also got the fact that Scully's going on her own little adventure. And we will probably talk about Clyde Bruckman at some point during this episode as well. But this is a kind of a vehicle for Scully and where they are in the season at the moment, where they're still doing these background checks, that they're still doing, the dog's work and the toilet bowl work, which Mulder mentions. So it's a chance for Scully to come out and shine a little bit. It's quite interesting because normally Scully goes out on an overtly religious mode on episodes that she has generally gone out for in the past. This one does have a touch of that, but it's not part of the story, apart from obviously the death element. But it's interesting how they kind of let her go out on her own on this one. And it's not, there's not really, the X-File is there, but it's more about, similar to what Clyde Bruckman did actually, it's more about the human condition and the effects that people have, and it asks so big a question on immortality. So what would you rate it out of 10, and what do you think generally of Scully's solo outing?
Yeah, in terms of Scully, that's the part I really like about the episode, and the part that really reminds me of Clyde Bruckman, that she initially starts out as just investigating. She's, skeptical of it. But then she really starts to connect, and she's thinking. She's not, like Ritter, she's not just going after the easy arrest. She wants the truth. She wants, she doesn't want to just, take the easy way out. She's on the side of the victims. And she's on the side of anyone who would be wrongfully convicted of something he didn't do. She knows, something is up about him, but she wants to get to the bottom of it before anything else happens. And it's that kind of curiosity and openness that I like about it, because she eventually does connect with his story. And I think you see, a lot of pity and some understanding, towards the end. And I really like that part of the story. I like that it's Scully who gets to go on that journey instead of Mulder. And I guess my rating, I would probably give it a 9, I think. It's pretty high up there for me, especially in season 6. Right. It's such a standout, I think, in the season.
Yeah, I mean, IMDb scores it at 8.5 out of 10 from 2,639 votes.
Oh, okay.
And if you look at the season as a whole on there, season 6 is an interesting season in itself because of the LA years that, it's on Triangles gets an 8.8, for example. The Dreamlands are 9s and 9.1s. How the Ghost Stole Christmas, which I know Marlene did, is an 8.4. So there's a bit of swaying. I mean, just before this, SR 819 got an 8.1, and then this gets an 8.5, and then the mythology kicks in, which is slightly higher. So it's up there. But season 6 generally overall, until you get to maybe Alpha and Trevor, start to decline a little bit. But yeah, we'll leave that for another day, and we'll find out who's hosting them soon, because I think behind the scenes there's a bit of a battle about who's hosting that one. But season 6 obviously skews quite largely. It's quite a popular season. I mean, what do you make, Marlene, of season 6 in general then, with the move to LA and the the kind of the where it is in the ethos of like the season 5 to the film to here to where we are now? And obviously this is kind of like one of the darker episodes. We haven't had much of this really going forward up until this point, really.
Yeah. And I noticed that when season 6 was first on, I think Tithonus was one of the first episodes that I genuinely really, really liked, because at the time I was not enthused about season 6. I was never at a point where I was going to stop watching the show, but I just, all the lighter episodes and they were kind of angst ridden, but just silly at the same time. And, after a number of years, I could go back and I watched them and I appreciated them, and, I like them for what they are now, but, at that time, Tithonus was the first one that I really was like, no, this is a great episode of The X-Files. And I thought it had sort of that Vancouver-esque feel without the same look to it. And it was dark, like you said, which I really, was a break from all of the kind of, again, like angsty lightheartedness is how I would describe it until that point, probably. What else? I had something else I was going to say about that. It's definitely one that stands out to me amidst season 6, still, watching it now.
Okay, Katie. So, what do you think then? With are you a fan of season 6 in general? And as I say, up until this point, really, we've only had SR819 that I could push as maybe probably the most, for argument's sake, the most old X-File as such. Because before that, you've got Reign Kings in terms of endearment and all kinds. How the Ghost Stole Christmas obviously is a special one. But how do you view season 6 and this new kind of angle they've got on where Tithonus lands in the season?
Yeah, I agree that this episode really kind of harkens back to kind of the old school X-Files. I love that, it's dark, it's moody, it has, kind of like a texture to it. It's got a grounding to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, part of season 6, I'm not really a fan. It's like too clean and shiny for me. I think there's a handful of episodes I do really like, but it's not a season that I go to on a whole to really rewatch a lot of the time. It's just, for me, like the difference is so great between 5 and 6, especially kind of, since I just started watching season 5 live, to jump immediately from that into 6 so soon, I think was a bit of a shock as well. But yeah, I love that it's gritty. It's got some like weight to it. When you see the scenes in New York with, the fog going or the smoke, and the light and the water on the street, it's like, it has some weight to it, which I like a lot. And kind of the score, I think, adds to that as well. You hear a lot of the music cues that have been used in, previous seasons, I think, that come back. And just the whole, the melancholy of it is something that I think really works and really stands out among the other episodes.
I touched upon that. I mean, I know they did do that a little bit in season 5. They started to use some of the musical cues that had already been used in the film, or, offcuts that they might have used in towards back end of season 5. And I only talked about that last week with Sarah on SR819, because there's a few moments in Skinner's journey that are so overtly the film, and does it take it out of you? And there's moments where it works really well, and there's other moments where it's like, oh, it's just the film. Stop it. Stop using that. That's not what the TV show's about. Right.
I just rewatched that. I noticed that too. Yeah. That jumped out immediately. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that element. Now, for me, this is going to be Tithonus is an interesting episode for me because it falls right in between SR819 and Two Fathers and One Son, and I wouldn't necessarily say this was a forgettable episode, because I think that is a complete disservice to the episode. When I was watching this probably live, I'm a Mulder fanboy, so it didn't have that much Mulder in it either. So It's got SR819, you got 2001 Son, there's mythology surrounding this, and it doesn't have much Mulder. So I struggled a little bit with this episode for some considerable time. And it's only in recent years that I know we were on a podcast a while back about reevaluating the X-Files. And this one, actually, when I've got to this, I was like, actually, this is probably one of the ones I've reevaluated the most. And I would now say it's a 9. I would say it was a 9 out of 10 for me, because it's, whereas early in my view, and I might not have even rated this, a 7 or 8 really. So it's an interesting kind of review on it. And also as well, it's probably not the right kind of area to talk about this in to some degree, but I think that this, for me, strangely enough, overtakes Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose. I think this is a better episode than that. And I think
that's interesting.
The only reason why I say that is that the kind of existential crisis, the kind of the darkness of the episode leans more to my Millennium kind of feeling to this episode, and could quite easily be retold for Millennium.
Oh, okay.
And the fact that Vince Gilligan didn't get a chance to do a Millennium episode, I think that this would, in some ways, especially some of back end of season 3, would like to borrow time, where there's a kind of a ethereal, angel-y type presence who was taking the life of somebody who's survived a train crash, for example, and should have drowned, and they get extra life, but that life is only on borrowed time, and they will have to be used somewhere else. And obviously Felig is kind of that character where he's been given this immortality, and by slight retooling, I think it would be a really interesting episode. And I think for me, the Clyde Bruckman thing, as much as I'm a massive Darren Morgan fan, I don't see the exceptional praise for it. I think it's a marvellous, wonderful Darren Morgan story, but it isn't up there for me in the episodes I love of Darren Morgan. And for Tithonus, I think it plays more to my miserable life. I kind of wallow.
Clyde Bruckman wasn't happy either.
Well, no, but I think the AV Club have infamously called Millennium Season 1 as misery porn, and I think that I actually really like Season 1 for that reason. And some of that sort of darkness, and that there's hardly any levity in it, and I actually quite like it for that reason.
Sometimes you need that, though. Sometimes you just want that sort of deep, dark horribleness.
Yeah, but Millennium Season 1 was like literally the whole season of it. So
yeah, that's what I remember, because I saw that when it aired way back when.
See, I've never seen Millennium, so
just unrelentingly bleak.
I've got a higher pain threshold than most people, So that's my kind of reasoning for it. And I think, as I say, the kind of Millennium aspects of it, I think it's not quite there as a Millennium episode, but I could easily see Vince Gilligan writing something like this for Millennium and it working. So that's where I take it from. So shall we dive into the episode then and start from the top and see how we get on?
Can I say one more thing? Because something you've said reminded me that for me, I far prefer Vince Gilligan's dramatic episodes to his comedic episodes. And I think that when you're talking about Clyde Bruckman and Darren Morgan and comparing it to Tithonus, it put that in my mind, that to me, the way that he's like weaving this story together, I think it's better writing, and I just enjoy it more. And I enjoy the comedies. I like Bad Blood a lot, but there's something about his dramas that just seems a lot deeper than the comedies. So I think that's another reason why this one really stands out as one of my favorites.
Yeah, I mean, I think just by you saying that as well, I think that probably the reason why I'm not as much of a fan of Clyde Bruckman is it's a dark comic story, but it isn't as overt as a Bad Blood or a Jose Chung's Out from Outer Space or a For Lost Head of Forehead Sweat. So I think it's more nuanced, but I think in the spectrum, I'd like to go darker than he did with it. And maybe that's the reason. Maybe it's not quite up there because I don't perceive it as much of a comedy as what Darren Morgan would do. But then when it comes to Clyde Bruckman, it's dark, it's funny, but the actual darkness of Tithonus actually, for me, wins it over. So, but yeah, that's the way I feel anyway. But let's go and dive into the episode in more depth, and we shall go and do that now. Right, okay, so we start, as you mentioned, in New York City with a young woman who's pushing a mail cart around in an elevator. And, we get our introduction to Felix. He helps her out with the trolley. And we kind of get this staple of slow-moving people being quite ominous and scary at the beginning. What do you make, Katie, to this first part of the opening? The fact that he doesn't say much. He kind of like looks like he's helping Samaritan at first, but then gets quite creepy very quickly.
It gets very creepy. I find this to be one of the scarier openings for the show, because I think, well, especially being a woman too, like everyone kind of knows the feeling of, being alone without any help nearby, but like you think someone might be following you. You're not sure what their intentions are, and that's like a terrifying feeling. And he's always just staying back in the shadows, but he's not letting her out of his sight. It's like he's constantly there. And the part when she's like desperately pressing the elevator button to get back on.
Yeah.
I think, you think she's safe at that point, but then he, sticks his arm in, he joins into the elevator. And I think it's really effective in its sort of building tension and its scary quality.
Yeah, I mean, Marlene, the episode as well, it kind of like it starts off with this, this big event, because it's an elevator shaft that's that basically falls down to the ground and kills a number of different people using 20th Century Fox speed. By the way,
I read that,
which always takes me out because Speed is one of my favorite films when I'm growing up. And every time I see that elevator shaft fall, I think, oh, where's Keanu Reeves? Where's Keanu Reeves at? So it does take me out the episode. But it starts off, I mean, during the course of the episode as well, it starts off with this big event, but we quickly go back into more grounded material. And not to mention, obviously, you're pushing the buttons. The floor levels were 10 and 13, which I thought was a nice little touch.
Great.
Before he pressed the 17 button.
Yep.
And then on rewatch, it'll be really interesting to see because, you know, you see everyone in black and white, as this is obviously a theme throughout the show of seeing people in black and white. But on first watch, you obviously won't know what that means. And then then we get Felix taking the pictures at the end. So what do you make to this opening, Marlene?
I agree with what Katie said. And I think there's the black and white, aspect adds to the sort of creepiness factor. And also, I want to say from what I'd read about Arthur Felig, the actual photographer, he was known for his sort of, like they said, stark black and white street photography. Yeah. And I think that really follows through the visual for the whole episode, but really starting in the teaser, because as dim as it is, when the young woman is walking with the cart and so forth, like she's sort of a more brightly lit figure. And I think that they do that throughout the episode, as well with Scully and with Mulder. She's like very high contrast look. And I feel like the whole episode has a lot of contrast of different types in it. And this one does too, because it's that sort of quiet, like Katie was saying, like the tension is building, and they get to the elevator, and then you have this elevator that's just in free fall. So all of a sudden everything is moving really quickly, so I think that all of that just amps up. Like you don't know what's going on, and these people are in black and white, and it's just the effect on the viewer, I think, is really, it lasts like across viewings. It's another one of those things that you can watch again and again, and I don't think it loses the feel or the tone of that.
Yeah, I was still tense watching it. Even, I watched it like 3 times for this episode, for this podcast. So
right.
Every time. Yeah. And the black and white too, it brings me back to, how Eugene Toombs sees, it's, stalking his victims. It's the opposite.
He'd see it. Right. Right.
The background goes into black and white and he only sees his target in color, but it's kind of the same visual cue of being like separated out. You're not sure why at this point, but.
Right. Well, that was something, now you mentioned that, it's something I was going to bring up, and we can do this now, because throughout this episode, we do get like touches. Now, I'm not saying it was done on purpose, but you get touches of like Felig is been around for a long, long time. Toombs was like hibernating and Powhatan Mill back in the day, and you've got that reoccurring theme of things happening during the course of the time. You've got this stakeout, at this of Felig's house, which obviously happens in with Eugene Victor Toombs as well, and there seems to be throughout this episode quite a few kind of touchstones on various different things. I mean, you've even got like, Barnett in Young at Heart, and, there's all these kind of like little elements of stuff that's throughout the thing. And Toombs, as you say, with the grey and the kind of the slow motion elements to it as well. I think it's really interesting that Gilligan's trying to put what he believes is an X-File together here. You were going to say something like that, Marlene, were you?
Oh, no. I also, like, way later on in the episode when Scully is talking to Felig, there's a moment that was almost directly out of Beyond the Sea as well, which has some connections to this too. But there's a line she says, like, I don't believe you. And it's like, that's exactly the way she said that, same line in Beyond the Sea. And it's kind of in a, not exactly similar situation, but with someone else that has this sort of, psychic ability, and there's, something personal at stake, all of these things. But it's the way that she said it in that voice that reminded me of Beyond the Sea. And I think that, of all the writers, Vince Gilligan probably pulls the most associative elements, I would say, from previous episodes. So not just like plot points and so forth, but things like what we're talking about right now that kind of connect your mind to what's happened before.
Yeah. Yeah, you get the throughout the episode as well, where Mulder's saying, it's an X-File. And Scully's, no, it's not. It's an X-File. Well, and then she doesn't really complete the sentence. Then by the end, she's saying, yes, it's an X-File. That's happened before in the past as well. It's, when they are separated at this point, whether it be for filming reasons, and they've written a story around it for that point. But that's happened before. And another one I picked up was when he was going through the records. That felt very much like The Field Where I Died. And there just seems to be all these little moments that seem to, not necessarily there, overtly on the page to say this was ripped out directly from this, but all these little things seem to like forge together to create, reminiscence of the years gone by, really.
Yeah, it's like he's pulling
That's
from...
a great way to put it, too.
it's like he's pulling from, classic visual touches or classic moments, things that happen in the X-Files that the viewer connects with. And if you don't really notice it in your head immediately, like you said, like rewatching this, like I took down a ton of notes of things, like you were saying, all these different episodes and little moments that harken back. And I think it works really well.
I mean, even with, likes of Agent Ritter, that harks back to kind of when Scully was last on the thing in Christmas Carol. So it's all seems to be, true. It all seems to be like just things that will instantly recall. And I don't always get that with the X-Files. I don't get that you can instantly think of something or something recalls that way. It's like, an episode of X-Files or they're going out to the suburbs. Yeah, fair enough. But it doesn't necessarily with this one. It just felt rich of that kind of stuff.
I think with Ritter too, there's a Krychek element as well, both in his eagerness and you don't know what he's up to or why he's been assigned, and I think that kind of goes back to Krychek. Yeah,
I was getting, I don't remember his name, but the detective in Squeeze that she works with, or the FBI agent, who he just wants to solve the case. He doesn't care. And that's when she says, I'm on the victim's side. Colton. I want the truth. Yes, Colton. Mm-hmm. I was getting that vibe a lot from her working with Ritter.
That's an interesting call as well. Yeah, definitely. But the scenes in the FBI. So Mulder, as I say, being a Mulder fanboy, Mulder during the course of the episode is in his element. He seems to have taken to background checks like no other. It's since Drive, he's basically been just this character of like, well, this is what I do now, kind of thing. And throughout this episode, you've got elements of him, like doing the checks, which we might have seen Scully do in the past, but, he does the research, he's doing the background checks, but he's also, there's elements of like the lone gunman must be helping him here to manage to, he must have some sort of key logger or keystroke manager or something on his machine, because he seems to find out everything that's going on.
To intercept.
And he seems to keep in tabs, doesn't he? So, but I thought he's a bit elitist with the whole toilet gag, though. I thought, there's people out there, toilet cleaning is really, really important. And,
that's true. It is.
So
that's true.
So yeah. But what do you make to Mulder in this episode? Because obviously he does take a step back, Casey. He does take a step back, but he is quite unique in this episode, because even to the point where he meets Ritter for the first time. A lot of previous times you might have got, he's still quite standoffish, don't get me wrong, but he's not as bad as what it has been, and he does seem to be more at a stage in his life at the moment where he's kind of resigned himself to these background checks for now, and it does seem to be an interesting character trait for him right now.
Yeah, there wasn't that sort of territorial battle that you might get in earlier years for Mulder, but he generally just seems sad at being left behind. I think, Scully gets to go off and look on this X-file and he's there. I mean, I do enjoy that he's, helping as much as he can. He's not, overtly trying to take the case over, but when she needs help, he's there to offer it and, doing that background checking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he's very, when she comes back after this meeting with Kirsch, he seems like super, I mean, first of all, he does have the information right away what the case is. But he's super enthusiastic about the material at hand, because he's talking about like murder by telekinesis. And I think he said something about like shamanistic death threat and all of this. And you can see that enthusiasm. And then like the next beat is him like lamenting, like, so they're splitting us up. And he's just, sad about it. Even though he seems excited about this case that she's going on. And then, I guess like what Katie was saying, he's sort of there in support when Scully calls him, or then he starts calling her when he's found out the information at the end, but then in contrast, like he's not taking any of his actual work seriously. And I mean, how could you, but so he's like playing games while he's making these background checks and sitting there kind of it's interesting that bullpen area is so, again, like very dark, and kind of depressing looking they're sitting in. But yeah, I liked his enthusiasm when he had something of interest to do to help her, as contrasting his kind of like morose, like they're having me do this again kind of attitude.
Yeah. I mean, he gets that like, sort of the Ehrmantraut stuff and just kind of laid back and, you know, he's not taking it too seriously. But when it comes to actually physically doing some investigative work, you know, rather than like he says in Drive, where it's like, you know, the bozo work or the, you know, looking for manure and all that type of thing he does in Drive. But you've got him, you know, you've got him actually when he's got something to chew on that he will actually do that because that's the way he is. And we've mentioned about his character on multiple occasions. I mean, I've got a question on, do you think he came back to that office and saw that he had a new high score on the golf game? Because, you know, Fletcher obviously was playing that quite a lot. So I don't know if that's,
I don't know.
That intrigued
Maybe.
him.
I mean, it's a good connection.
But what about Ritter then? Because you mentioned about him in reference to Tombs, that he goes through a bit of a story here because he comes in, he's an intelligent, you know, FBI agent. He's managed to piece together some information together, which is quite a lot of detective work. You know, it's a lot of work that he's done there. And throughout the course of the episode, you know, he quickly turns and, you know, you've got him calling Scully Deana and Scully turning back saying Scully, you know, and then as you mentioned, the fact that he just wants to get Fellig out the way. But the fact that, you know, Scully then says, you know, about the truth and stuff like that. And then obviously the end where, you know, he's a very lucky man, as Mulder says. But that's a lot for a character in an episode to go through, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I think so.
Like when you first meet him, you know, you don't really have an inkling that he would end up the way he did. He seems like a very eager, you know, he wants to solve it. He's almost like, you know, kind of a young Fox Mulder in that he's looking through all of these details. He's taking the time to piece this together with this, you know, kind of strange case. And it's only really when you start to see him investigate Fellig that he only hones it on that. He won't look outside of the fact that he thinks Fellig is a murderer and he wants to take him any way he can. So, you know, that's when it starts to turn. But initially, he seems like a kind of a promising, open-minded guy.
And he mentions, too, that when she's talking about like how no judge would issue a warrant based on what he's just said about, you know, like, I don't care if he did this particular murder or whatnot, that, you know, that wouldn't be enough. And he says that he knows the judge and they would have the warrant by like whatever time, you know. And then that's when Scully kind of gives him the eye, like his way of doing this. He's kind of not on the up and up, you know. It's not ethical.
It's playing by numbers, isn't it? It's a drive to, you know, I think Kirsch says this to Dogger in later seasons. You know, you've got the best success rate for the X-Files since year dot, even though Dogger has no idea what's going on. And obviously that's a different character completely, but you know, it seems that Ritter seems to be into the let's get the things on paper. I'm driven from that point of view rather than actually getting the truth. It's more a case of I need to get numbers on the page about what my stats are going to be.
I think that he's kind of in between. I feel like he's torn between doing something like doing like good work and impressing. I mean, because the fact that Kirsch assigned him already, you know, puts the skepticism in your head, I think, of like what he's up to. Like, why is he going to be working on this case with Scully? But then, like you said, he does seem like he's really done this work and has put these things together that most people wouldn't notice, you know. And then he kind of turns that other way when Scully like sort of questions his ethics on the case, I would say. And then at the end, it's almost like he sort of realizes what this is really about, or realizes sort of like the weight of these sorts of decisions that he's making and whatnot. So I think that he's a more, you know, I mean, he's never going to be the main point of the episode, obviously, but I think he's a more fully drawn character than like a Tom Colton or, I don't know, some of the other people that we've compared him to.
Yeah, he's not such a caricature of just, you know, a bad agent. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it goes to Vince Gilligan's writing, if you think about it, that, you know, that he starts off this unique person who's, you know, he's noticed all this thing. He wants to do, he's found something which could turn the tide. And, you know, it then becomes, I just want to get a means to an end. That's a total Vince Gilligan character. If you look at Breaking Bad, that's exactly what Walter White is. You know, it's someone who's doing it for his family. And then obviously things transpire and things go downhill from there. And Ritter's, you know, it's just another version in points. You know, he's that, you know, small man, as Darren Mooney would say, trying to be big, and you know, he just falls down the wrong side, really, rather than doing what Scully would do, which would be to go down the truth. And to work that out, he takes a slightly different path. And that's got a Villigan staple right over it. So, Kirsch, you mentioned Kirsch. Now, we'll briefly go over Kirsch, but he does like a kind of stuff that we've had in the past where people have said, Scully, Mulder's a lost cause and Scully, might have a future. And that's all we really get of him, through this episode. We've had a few mentions on different episodes and whatever, but, we do get to see him in this mode that, what do you think to Kirsch so far, Katie, and just in general, but that he seems to want to give Scully this chance to get out of the Mulder shadow as such?
I found it kind of surprising that he would, kind of give her, after all they've been through so far in the season, that he would give her this chance that, he says he hopes Scully isn't a lost cause, that she had a promising career and maybe he can sort of draw her away from Mulder's influence. So, yeah, I found that kind of surprising.
I think it's interesting because I think I've seen it in a sort of one-sided way in the opposite direction, because I've seen it as more duplicitous. Like he says that Ritter had a promising career, and he says, like, so did you at one time, and it's just, he's insulting her career. He's kind of manipulating her. And I think I focused on that aspect rather than him giving her a chance to do something else where she would be sort of successful and recognized.
Yeah, I didn't see it as totally.
It's a valid perspective, though.
I didn't see it as totally altruistic on his part, but I'm surprised that he even, kind of picked her out. He could have just said, Mulder and Scully, they're done. There's no point anymore.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It is interesting that it's, obviously Gilligan getting a chance to write him and things, and it's not quite as black and white as what he has been in the past, and there is an element of him trying to be not a mentor, because that's a wrong word completely, but at least giving her a chance as such. And
she does try to pull Mulder along into it when he says all that stuff to her, and then she says, like, Agent Mulder and I will begin immediately. So she's not leaving him behind. And then, of course, like, Kirsch says that he's a lost cause. So that's why I just, I don't know. I don't see it in a positive way.
No, I can totally see that. And what I like particularly that we are told by the way the story is written that, I mentioned before that the elevator scene is a way of, like, giving you this big old grand opening with the mixture of the people, him in the hallway and the elevator falling down. And to be absolutely clear, for the audience, we get a person who has a heart attack, a blue collar worker who has an actual heart attack. So that gives us the kind of the mode of, like, well, he just seems to be floating around these people rather than actually causing it. Because technically you could say that he caused the lift to fall if you wanted to go down that route. But, no one in the right mind would do that. But there is that credence to it. This is clearly demonstrating that he's just wanting there to get the shot. Mm-hmm. I mean, the way that he follows him, Marlene, I mean, what do you make to the fact that we've gone from one extreme to just this one guy who's having a heart attack?
I mean, I think he's opportunistic, felt like that is he's kind of, and there's something passive about him, even though he's just, having to keep track of all of this information and find out where these possible deaths would be. And then he sees someone that he thinks is going to die. So it's just an opportunity for him, follows him. I don't know. I think there's a lot more. I think it becomes even more pronounced with I guess it's the prostitute that they come upon when Scully goes on the ride with him. Just like the idea of bystander intervention, but he's clearly, like, it means no harm to this person, but he's a little bit, reminds me a little bit in that way of Leonard Betts. And he's not victimizing anyone, but also, like, his intentions are kind of neutral, I think that's morally interesting. Like, he's not going to try to help people, but he's also not necessarily, like, aiding and abetting their deaths either.
No, you don't ever feel because the next kind of shot is when we see all the pictures in the police record office where you see him in, various different years dating back to 1964. And Ritter not really seeing that he's not really aged that much, which, he's not really aged backwards. If you look at him in 1964, he's, apart from a tash, he's not really changed,
Right.
so, but you do get this feeling that he hasn't overtly tried to help anyone either. he does mention it later in the episode about the fact that, that they're lucky people. But how did he get to that point? Where did that come from? How did he actually get to that point? Which I feel is interesting in itself. But I did think that Agent Ritter was, and I can see why, because he's not overtly looking for the X-Files, but there is an element of like, surely you'd see it's the same picture. And
right.
I mean, we also flip as well, because you've got, the fact that we've now got the kind of story, there's something not quite right with him. There's something ominous with him. We've had the aging, thing. We've seen that he's watched the heart attack. We've seen the elevator shaft. And then we do get something a bit more horrific. You mentioned about the prostitute, which we'll talk about a little bit when we come to talking about the death, element to it. But, we actually physically see him getting, attacked as well. I mean, what were your reactions, Katie, to Felig's attack? And because it starts off, those trainers are wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I'm just, it's just a shame we weren't slightly more in the future where you can actually get them on little wheels. They can roll down the hill with it.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, exactly. But those, Felig's obviously taking the picture from above. He's watching the events unfold because he's obviously been stalking the Knights to find this death. And, he gets actively involved in this. And you can imagine this happening to him, a lot over the years. But, what did you make to the stabbing scene for Felig?
I thought it was pretty chilling. I just actually wanted to go back quick just to the previous man having a heart attack, though. I find that one especially chilling because he's looking this man right in the face, right in his eyes as he's dying. And he's not, he's not responding to this man's suffering. He's not on his cell phone calling, 911. He's taking a camera. And this man sees him doing it. And I find that really, like when he looks him in the eyes, I find that very...
Yeah, there's just no connection.
Yeah.
Like, there's no, human response.
It's just, complete indifference. And, just kind of, being in the man who's having a heart attack, being in his mind, wondering what he's going through. And he sees this guy just... not helping him one bit. Yeah. So I find that one pretty chilling. But in terms of the knife attack, he seems to not really have a lot of care for his own personal safety. Like, I don't know if he knew the guy ran away, but obviously the murderer probably is still in the area and he saw him taking a picture. So he's not really concerned. It's
probably not the first time it's happened, though, is the thing that I started thinking.
Oh, yeah, definitely not.
As well. Yeah. Like when you talk about he's not concerned for his physical safety, he's like, oh, I've done this before.
Oh, it's going to happen again. He's just after he has that singular focus of getting that shot and nothing else really matters to him.
No. I mean, I sent a message to Tony this afternoon about saying, it must be quite painful getting stabbed in the back that many times.
You would think so, yeah.
And knowing that you're not gonna die from it, and you just have to survive it. It must be pretty horrific. But
that shot too reminded me, the way he's reaching behind him to pull the knife out of his back. I got serious bounty hunter vibes from that. And he gets up pretty fast.
This is where we change the change in scene. We haven't really talked too much about Scully and the fact that the difference between Ritter and Scully is interesting, and they play off quite well here because, Scully, when we look at the following day and the looking at the crime scene, Scully sees the pool of blood, and we see it through her eyes as she's a seasoned professional. She knows what she's doing. She's a seasoned investigator as such, as opposed to Ritter, who's just seeing the blatantly obvious element of it. And, Scully's starting to put the pieces together here. And what do you make, Marlene, to Scully's depiction of the way that Vince Gilligan writes Scully in this episode? Because there is this kind of onus on her. It's a fine balance to pick because she is the one leading this investigation rather than Mulder. She's not quite getting to the point of saying, I've got this theory, that theory, but there is an element of, the fact that there has to be some movement forward for her to fully appreciate the episode. And it's done pretty much after this bit, but there's the investigative parts of it that we've seen Scully do time and time again. What do you make to the way she's written?
So I remember when I was doing a little bit like background reading for this, there was some critique of her, I can't remember who made it, but of Gillian Anderson's performance, saying that it was tired. And I really don't agree with that. I think that there's a weariness to Scully in this episode that's really appropriate to like sort of where she is in the show, and then like what's happening in the episode and the entire tone of it. But then there's also, like we've talked about already, this kind of earnestness to find out what's going on and to not just sort of like push an answer through to have a case solved number or whatever in your file. So I think that that's an interesting, both of those, like that combination of her being sort of world weary, but then still earnest, I think is interesting. And then, she has that, I guess the phone call with Mulder when she's talking about Felix, and she's, you can almost like see her thinking more and more about how unusual he is. And he says something about he's definitely peculiar, or he's unusual. That's what she says. Yeah. And then Mulder says, like, as in he plugs up like a cork when you stab him, and she's still, she was like, it was like, that's a good Mulder line. I feel like he really, fulfilled his, quip, I guess, requirements in this episode really well. But no, I think that journey of hers, sort of intellectual and personal, of going through like the skepticism and so forth, but I mean, in a warranted way, like she's really trying to figure out like what this guy is about, and then you get to the point when she has that kind of like, it's a long scene, when she's in, I think more than one scene, but the whole, act or so that she's in the apartment with him, which I think is fabulous. They're having these conversations, and she's sort of like developing her sense of disbelief and belief at that point too. So I think that she was really, I mean, it's not an obvious journey like she would have in a conversation with Mulder, going back and forth and sort of bandying about these different viewpoints and then coming up with something that's different. But I think that she kind of goes through it in her own way and in her conversations with Felix. And then even at the end in the scene with Mulder, I think that she's sort of listening to what Mulder's telling her about that's only, looks for you when you seek its opposite, and processing that too. So I think that she's perhaps coming out of some of that. There's like an attempt to get out of that kind of like weary mode that she may have been in.
Yeah. We'll get to that end scene. Don't you worry.
Yeah.
Katie, so what do you think to Scully in this one then? Because as I say, she's the driving force in this episode, and she has got this line to be drawn, because one of the things I was going to touch upon actually, and you can involve this in your answer, is a lot of critique has been put on the fact that the show has changed. It's become more of a Twilight Zone or an Outer Limits, and this kind of falls in that mold, especially with the way that there's an element to it where they talk about the science when Felix is talking to Scully, and it's like, well, forget about the science kind of thing. And for someone like Scully, that is pretty difficult to do. So what do you make to that overall, really?
I think it just shows sort of the evolution of the show. And it was really interesting, Marlene, that you read that about her performance, because I, like you, I never took it to be the actress as just being worn out. I took it to be Scully's character, absolutely in character, being weary and tired, and she doesn't want to be working with Ritter, but that she keeps her interest and she keeps her focus. And I think in terms of the show itself, it's you could call it a monster of the week, but it's not how the show used to be. Here's the monster. Mulder believes it. Scully doesn't believe it. There's more of a nuance to it now, I think, which I actually really appreciate about her character. She doesn't admit it as readily. But you can definitely see in her character that she may not have the science to put it on, but it's still a compelling story, and she still wants to, connect with this person and get to the bottom of what is going on.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to look at the character, as you say, the monster of the week is not quite that. We'll get episodes like Hungry in later seasons, but the fact that she's playing against someone who's actually been told to play apathy, that in itself, it's like, she's got to play off that. And there's got to be like a range of, a range of emotion that she's got to go through. And there's, I wasn't aware of that criticism of Scully. I didn't see that in this episode, to be honest with you. It's one of the reasons why I don't like Never Again, because I just think it's just too much for me. I can't handle it. And I don't get that from this episode. I don't get that one of the turn-offs for that episode is Gillian Anderson's not necessarily performance, but what she's been asked to play in Never Again. And it doesn't work for me. But this one, I don't have that opinion. I just think it's more a case of that she's trying to feel her way into what, one, is happening, and two, what is Fellig about. So I know, so what, Marlene, what do you make to that then?
No, I agree with you. I think, in comparison to Never Again, I think there's a lot of pointing to like, oh, Scully is having this sort of, doubt about her work or crisis or what, all of these things, but it's very much on the nose, I think, in terms of like calling out, whatever it is she's going through. And then her job is to enact that, is the way that kind of like what I'm seeing after I'm, thinking about your comments, because I hadn't quite thought about it in that way before. Whereas in this episode, it seems more like that's how she is in life at this time. And it's this natural process that she's going through in the episode. So it's not pointing to the fact the episode's not about her being world weary. It's just that it's just like, that's what the way that she happens to be. And this is only adding to it, or seemingly adding to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was going to say too, I think it's interesting what you said about like the science and so forth, because I think had they tried to have some sort of scientific explanation, it really wouldn't have worked. And I think it works because of the way that Fellig addresses that. Whereas I think, like way back when we were discussing our favorite seasons, I think like season 3 was sort of the height of when they really were, and season 2 as well, but when they really were connecting something that was sort of extra scientific, that had an explanation, but the X-Files took it a little further, whether it was a monster of the week or a phenomena, that type of thing. And I think that there's some episodes that don't work as well, that are in between there, where it's like they kind of have this, somewhat like half-hearted scientific, like they gave it a shot, but nobody really maybe put the same research thought into it, is the way that it seems to me. Like it doesn't quite connect. And I think that this one is just of a different nature. So they don't try to make it into something that it's not, and they're not trying to force Scully into having this experience just to have her have this experience. So,
no. And that's actually, strangely enough, just by you talking about that elicits a response from me, because it's very much what Millennium would do. Millennium doesn't go, by any stretch of the imagination, goes to ask those type of questions. It's very much, about the why. Why is it happening? More than, how is it happening? So,
right.
With Millennium, it's generally the fact that Frank Black in Millennium is going to each individual case. It does change within seasons, and season 2 is very much, a different beast altogether. And season 3 becomes more X-Files to a degree. But even then, it's still not quite the procedure of like, this happens, that happened, this happened. It's more, why has that happened? What's the emotional resonance of that? And that's something that, obviously X-Files does loads of times, but the fact that they're not going down that route of trying to explain it is another kind of tick in the box for like why I probably feel it feels a little bit more like a Millennium episode than such. I'm not saying it looks like a Millennium, feels like a Millennium episode, but there is those little elements that can kind of fit into that bill. And, going back to Scully, because there's going back to the Clyde Bruckman kind of mode of this story, because she's in the car, she's doing the the stakeout. She obviously sees that Fellig knows that she's there, and the camera clicks away, and her mode is to basically go, right, I'm not having this. I'm just going to go up and ask him some questions, and then go for a ride with him, and find out about the shot. I mean. Then we get into this kind of natural element, Katie, of where we've got Fellig and Scully in the car together, and he points out the prostitute, and the fact that he has this apathy, and that Scully's itching to get out there to try and help, and obviously eventually does. I mean, what the way that's played out, and then the inevitable happens, and in some ways it would be. Scully, and I know what's coming up shortly about, we can talk about determinism and all kinds now, but what do you make just generally of the emotive aspect that, effectively Scully could see this, that she actually caused the very things she tried to stop? And what did you make to that?
Yeah, you can see her, twitching in the car, and we hear the camera flash. That camera flash is terrifying, by the way. And I wonder if like Unruhe, the events in that episode kind of come back to her mind
Right. Yeah.
You don't know, but that just adds to the tension. So that you have that sound kind of whining building up. You can see her, watching the guy attack the woman as, getting more escalating. And
no, I was just thinking, I had this like random thought with the flash, because I think that's one of the things that's creepy about photography is that sound of like that or whatever, and the flash is,
that big old fashioned flash
charging. They just really use that to full effect.
Yeah. So that just adds to the tension. And yeah, like you were saying, Kurt, she does her best to prevent it. She can't stand by and see. She sees the obvious. She thinks the man is going to kill the woman. So, and I enjoy the visual of her just taking this guy down, this, tiny woman just pulling this guy to the ground. She has him under control, slaps him. And she thinks she's, interfered. But then you see the bus hit the woman when she walks away, and, you can see it in her face that she's just, the way that happened, maybe what he's saying is true. He doesn't know how it's going to happen. He just knows who death will visit.
Yeah.
The how is always a surprise.
Yeah. Which he relates to as well. I mean, Marlene, this thought of determinism then, because, the fact that these events were always going to happen, it's not really touched upon in the episode, but it's an interesting thing that they've used this element of Scully being involved in that death, because they didn't necessarily need to go down that route. It is an interesting decision that they made there, isn't it?
Oh, I think it's very interesting, because I think she's in the car and I think she's trying to find like some sense of agency in what Fellig's doing, and that he's just kind of a bystander. I mean, his whole purpose is, as he tells her later, like chasing death, basically. But she's still trying to figure out like what role he's playing in this. And then she ends up intervening, and there are all of these things about, I guess, ideas about bystander intervention. And she seems throughout the episode, like, why would you not intervene, and help someone that is in trouble or whatever? Like that's, I mean, as a person and as a, FBI agent, I think that's just going to be her MO, whereas Fellig is just being, again, like very passive. And then, like you said, this idea that, we think it's going to be the man that's going to attack the woman and kill her. And then Scully intervenes and so forth. But then the fact that she's hit by the truck, it's like, there's a suggestion that she was destined to die either way, and there's no answer to that. It's just, it's interesting to put Scully in that position of like, had she not intervened, would it have, maybe the man would have walked off, or maybe the woman would have died anyway. You don't know. But I think it's that series of cause and effect and so forth that starts to look really deterministic, kind of until we get, I mean, this is way jumping ahead, but I think the contrast to that is like when we get to the end and Scully doesn't die and Fellig sort of takes her death. There's this kind of intervention motif that I think is really strong through the X-Files that balances out the determinism idea. And I really think it's played well in the whole episode, but in this scene kind of brings it to the forefront.
Yeah, because she's now part of events. She's involved.
Exactly.
And yeah, the question is, if he's chasing death around, did death have this woman marked in any way? If Scully hadn't intervened, was she always destined to be there at that time to stop this murder? Or, like you said, would it have gotten her another way? So I find that really interesting to think about.
Yeah, because at the end, I mean, we have to assume that, because Fellig sees Scully in black and white, so it's kind of like her time has come. But then he intervened, and it was sort of relieved her of that. So it's interesting the way that's done complexly, but I think without pointing to it or having it be like, today this is our philosophical theme on the X-Files. It's just in the story itself.
Yeah, because it's not like a final destination where it's an action piece where death will get you no matter what, and it's more nuanced than that, and it's obviously about the characters and the fact that Fellig is where he is at the time that he's at. But it is an interesting question, not either way though, because it's kind of like they've used that, and it's a good talking point. It's a good point to to say if Scully had intervened, would she have died anyway? And it's, and they don't dwell on it. It's just happened. It's just a case. And I do like the scene right before that Scully goes over, that there is a vehicle that comes zooming past just before she crosses the road as like foreshadowing.
Yeah. The mail truck goes right in front of her. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a really nice piece. But yeah, so yeah, it's not as I say, it's not that type of episode, but it's nice that they've actually put something like that in there, because it gives us a counterpoint for Scully wanting to help and for Fellig just wanting to watch. And, Fellig has got information that Scully doesn't have at that moment as well, but that's the thing with Fellig is, as I mentioned to earlier, is that we don't ever feel that he's ever been in that position before, that he's always had that kind of element of, apart from his wife, that's the only thing that we've ever really seen any empathy come from him at all. So it is interesting to think about if he had in the past, had he ever been like that, the fact that he found himself immortal, did he ever try and help anyone, or did he get to the point of just wanting to get back to the death element to it, which is interesting in itself. So yeah, so when we do get to the actual questioning, so moving on to that thing with Fellig and Scully, when they go back to the house and Scully questions him on those things I've just mentioned, the contemptible lack of compassion for any other human being. How did you take that, Marlene? Because it's a really interesting conversation that they both have, even the point of like love and things, only last 75 years and whatever. It's a really interesting conversation they have there.
Can I back up one moment and just discuss some of the visual? So as this scene is getting started, I noticed there's this shot of Fellig. He's walking along the street and there's a car that honks at him and he kind of jumps. It's almost as though he's not supposed to be in that space, or it's like he doesn't completely exist. It's not just a car almost missing somebody. I just thought that was an interesting little detail that they put in there, and you have to wonder again, like how many thousands of times in his long life that must have happened. And then we see Scully just standing outside his apartment. And again, like they're both really, really brightly lit against this dark background. So they have this very like high contrast look to them that precedes that scene. I don't know. I think I noticed more of the visuals of the episodes now than I did when I was watching them when they were first on. So I wanted to mention that.
I love that shot of her just standing on the step. She just comes into shot.
Yes.
And it's like inevitable that she's there and he's there and they both know it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice little touch. I always forget about it, and just seeing it where she's got her hands crossed over, it's like, are we having this conversation now? Sort of thing. It's quite like that. Right.
And she's just there waiting. And she's kind of speaking in that kind of like a very low tone too, which I thought was appropriate. It just went with the tone of the episode, that kind of like deeper voice that she's using. And she, this is the part where she talks about how he profits off of other people's deaths and so forth. I don't know, because I think it goes back to the question you asked about Scully's progression through the episode, because she's asking why he shouldn't go to prison, which isn't that's more of like the moral standing. It's not the legal standing that she took in the office scene with Ritter. I mean, this is sort of her unofficial feeling, I guess. And then there's just so much to this to unpack, like the conversation about love, I think takes place a little bit later on, but she seems to have this, I mean, I don't want to say life affirming because that just sounds too happy for where she is at this point. But despite the fact that she seems kind of weary, she still, I think, always has this, I don't know how to express it properly, but this sort of like belief in, like in life, I would say, or, like she says, like, what about love and so forth? Like there's something that doesn't wear out about people, and I think that she still maintains that despite all of this stuff that's going on in the episode and whatever else, she's been through to that point.
She sounds idealistic almost when she says there's too much to learn. There's love. Like, how could you have too much life? She's not thinking.
How could you have too much life?
She's not thinking about the reality that Fellig has been living all these years.
Yeah.
Right.
And we'll talk about that at the end of the episode as well.
Yes. It's not like she's in a great mood at the time. She's like, oh, well, life is great and there's so much to learn and I'm going to go to this class afterward. And, she's not in that place mentally herself, which I think makes it a lot more that gives it a lot more like gravitas, like the weight of what she's saying is that she really does believe that, even though she might not be feeling that way at the time.
I think it's more, she's full of regret that, normal people don't get to have that.
And then that, I think to me, there's a religious aspect of that for her character as well. Like eternal life to her probably is something different than what Felag's experiencing. And that's never brought out in the episode. But I think just because of what we know of her character, that's another thing that we could discuss too. Whereas he sees it as this endless, physical life, and everybody else, I think he calls them lucky bastards, and says that, everybody else gets to experience something that he doesn't experience. And we don't quite get Scully's take on that, but I don't know. I think that you can sort of infer that maybe she thinks that, I don't know. I think eternity to her probably has a different meaning than it does to him.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mentioned before with the kind of religious aspects, because it's not overt. It's there in Scully's character, and that's great writing, because it's like, you don't need to have that in the episode. You just know of Scully's character, that there's behind the scenes as her thought process on how that works. And, and the fact that, that Felig has got to this point, you have that feeling from him as well, that he's not a religious person, that, he's just gone, well, Def's not doing his job, or, I did not want to do that. I closed my eyes and turned away, which we'll get into shortly. But, you get different viewpoints on this idea. And I think it's really an interesting glimpse into the way that people will portray or perceive that motion and this kind of, this kind of study on what's happening in the scenes.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I think for her, in her mind, she's not thinking of the reality of having to go through it by yourself. I think because that's not the religious sort of overtone. It's it's a paradise altogether with people you love. And, if the reality, if you're going through this on Earth, if it's just you, then yeah, it's going to be a horribly lonely existence where everyone you love leaves you. And I think you absolutely would get hardened the way that Felig does.
Yeah. And so it's more like, when will this physical life end? Because he can't end it himself. Like, he talks about all the and I thought that was a great, just all of the way he tells all of these stories is, it's almost like, even though we've seen it so many times, I'm still just fixated on the way that he's speaking. Because he talks about like the pills and the razors and the gas and bridges and so forth. And just the mood of that, I think, really works. But it's like, he just wants to get out of this physical life. And I think when he talks about how he, had forgotten his wife's name and so forth, he, it doesn't seem like he's really met anybody else. And I don't just mean like in terms of having another wife, but just in terms of something else that would enrich his life as it keeps going,
It's like there's no point.
I don't know. And I don't mean to sound so like optimistic about it, that I think like, in contrast to Scully, who is also not in a, like I said, like not in a great optimistic place right now, but just like her sort of probably take on what I would think she would see as sort of a spiritual value of life. Very different. Yeah.
He's pretty much chosen a life of isolation, hasn't he? Because if he's gone to the point of forgetting his wife and I thought to look her up, and see what happened to her, kind of thing. It was like, I've completely forgotten her name, and, there's no indication that he's done anything but, the work that he's been doing. There's a nice touch at the beginning of this scene, actually, where, we walk into the apartment and the police scanner's on. That is his life. That is his entire life is going out looking for that shot. That's the one sole thing he's got in his life. And as we've all known during the pandemic, the fact that so many people have had so many issues with mental health and stuff, and just having that one thing to do, would be really damaging, So the fact that he's become this apathetic person, and that's his whole new role in life, and he lives forever, and he's saying that lucky bastards. You can see why he thinks that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. When he says this line, I got left behind, like, you really pity him in that moment. He may be apathetic towards other people, but you can understand why. And, I love the delivery of that line.
Yeah. And it comes in, when you were talking, Marlene, about the bits where you're saying about he tried the razors, he's tried the pills, he's tried jumping off bridges and stuff. Scully actually does turn around at that point and says, I don't believe you. And the way he says, yes, you do. That's why you're here. I think that is so pointed, and I think that's a perfect time to say that, because that is something that you wouldn't hear from Mulder as such. And you get this with the characters like Clyde Bruckman. You know, when Scully's in these moments with older men, which keeps jumping up. I know the review mentioned this about where Mulder's got the sister aspect and the empathy towards women. It seems to be she's got the empathy towards these older men,
like these father figures.
Yeah.
I don't even know, like in some of the cases though, I wouldn't consider them necessarily father figures. I think that there's a good, there are examples of that and good kind of contrast to Mulder to be made in that. But if you look at people like Alfred Fellig and like Clyde Bruckman, there are a number of other instances that I'm, not thinking of right now, that of a sort of either an affinity or a comparison of Scully with older men and those relationships that she has with them that I think is really interesting.
Like she connects well, I think, with
does,
them.
yes.
Especially in these two episodes. I love, this is going back a bit, but when they're first in the interrogation room with Fellig and she's kind of standing off to the side by the window, the visual's gorgeous of that shot. But he, you can see him, he's pretty much just staring at her when he's talking, even though Ritter's asking him questions. And I kind of like that.
He's just attending to her.
That initial kind of like visual of a connection. So I wonder if he sees anything in her at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's the way Vince Gilligan sees the characters. He always hones in on those type of elements, and I think it's just so wonderfully done. I mean, if we move a little bit further into the conversation, this is succinctly put in when we talk about the yellow fever. That epidemic, which was what I think it was 1800s. Was when the yellow fever was in New York, I believe.
1795 to 1803, I said.
Yeah, so, I mean, the nature of that story is to get the holding of hands and the final scene where obviously Scully he holds onto Scully's hand and takes death from her. And, again, you can look at the allusions to Clyde Bruckman at that point as well. But, but the way you mentioned about the way he tells that story and the fact that there was this nurse the way he describes that, I think is really telling to the episode, because it paints a picture. I think the yellow fever and the position that they've put Fellig in paints this picture of like the fact of the horrors that he's gone through, the fact that he's gone through those three like epidemic waves, which is telling. And obviously it's a good story point to pass on the story as well.
No, I was just gonna say it's just absolute suffering, his entire life.
I think in that story though that he tells, which again is like really well told, like the whole thing about Washington Square Park and the yellow sheet sticking out from the mud and so forth. But when he's telling the part about being in the city-run contagion ward and how this nurse did the best she could and sat with him and so forth, and then he saw death flitting around the room and he wanted her to look at it and not him, I think that's it's kind of like he's kind of always been this way. It's, he's had this life that's gone on too long, for him at least. And so he maybe has this apathy towards people and thinks that they are, lucky and they're going to die and so forth. And he just wants to take the picture. But then the story that he tells, there's that element to it too, that's like, he was quite happy to have somebody else take his place than somebody that was innocent and helping him. It was okay if she died in his place. So I think that says something about the character lasting that long as well.
Yeah, because around this time as well, we start to find out about, Mulder starts to find out about the fact he was wanted for murder, and the fact that there was a massive manhunt and it was still active in some ways. It's interesting it comes into play around this moment in time, isn't it? Because it's obviously designed to build up the stakes that now Scully's in danger. And then as we see, she turns black and white in the visuals, and then that's meant to bring us that agency and the fact that you've got him nicking the phone, which I think it's the one scene is the fact that Scully's standing there and the phone being pickpocketed is the scene that I remember the most from any of the episode. Those are the two moments I really kind of get to. But you're right with that this is why I keep going back to the fact that Felix feels like there hasn't been a moment where he was actively going out. You know, he was wanted for murder at some point. And, you know, the way we see him, can you particularly see that happening? Not really, but then you don't really see him being an all out hero of trying to save people either. He just feels that, you know, he's almost, you mentioned about the car earlier, the fact he's just missing in the world. He's not really having an impact on the world. And it feels like kind of that, you know, he's again, the little man with no impact, like your pusher, you know, exactly the same sort of thing. He needs to find something that will have impact on the world. But it's just slightly done differently with, as you say, the fact he turns the other way and doesn't want to, and just is quite happy for someone else to die in his place.
I think a lot of it too, you know, I think it's just automatic self-preservation too. If you were, you know, he said he was out of his mind with fever, you know, and he's actually, he thinks he's seeing death. You know, how much of that is really going on in his head? I don't think at that point, he's actively thinking, I want this person to die. I think he's just thinking, I don't want to die. Which I think probably anybody would feel, but I don't, you know, he doesn't know the consequences of what that choice will bring.
He says, I wanted her to look at him. Or I wanted him to take her and not me. Yeah. So, I mean, I agree. Like, there's a sense of self-preservation, but I still think, like, even in the way he's telling the story as a memory, because who knows how it was, you know, when it actually happened for him, you know, there's still that, what's, you know, Scully's called out, this sort of like lack of compassion. Yeah. I
mean, to me, I kind of see it more as he's not actively wanting her to die. He doesn't want himself to die. Yeah. So, and at this point, he's so apathetic that, I'm sure that is how he is, you know, describing it.
I have one other thing if you don't mind, I was going to go back to, because I just saw it in my notes, and it's before this, like, the discussion of yellow fever, when they're talking about love and does love last forever and so forth. There's a moment when Scully is playing with her cross. And she's kind of in the background. So I was like, what is she doing? But she's playing with her neck. Like, you can't quite see exactly what she's doing, but she's sort of like fingering that cross. And that's when she asked Felix why he is this way. And he says there's someone took his place. So I think is really interesting too, because it's just such a small moment, but it fits so very well in that.
It does. And just while we're going back to notes, there was a note I put in with obviously the pictures of death, and you know, talk about dark humor when she went. I don't know as much about cameras as you do, but to me that looks like a lens flare. He just turns on and says, "Yeah, you don't know much about the cameras." Which I did howl with laughter of that. That was good. Yeah, that darkly was comic, but I thought that was a wonderful moment.
Yeah. I did. Yeah, that was good.
And what I was just about to say as well with that moment as well, the fact that. You know, the way that it's portrayed in this episode, I think, is really unique as well. And the fact that he has probably seen, if he's going out every single night and has been doing that since the 1800s, you know, hundreds and thousands of days, and all for finding the moment that happens at the end of this episode, it's a test to the fact that and he's only ever caught it on camera once, that this is a test to the fact that, you know, this is a fluke, random act that's kind of happens once in a billion, you know, kind of thing. And that, you know, this was it. This was it finally coming around, because it's not as if we've got, you know, hundreds of immortals walking around the planet. It seems to be like it seems to be a freak of nature, one-off occurrence that's happened. You know, and it has to be a certain the circumstances seem to be fairly not mundane, but that, you know, it could happen to anyone, but the fact that he then follows it and goes looking for it, which we'll come to at the very end of this episode, the fact that he's looking for this very thing, and it's taken him all this time just to get the glimpse up until this point before the end of the episode, it just attests to that fact. I think that, you know, there's the chances of it happening are minuscule in the grand scheme of things.
So Felix, I noticed that when, as Felix is telling Scully the story about yellow fever when it killed half of New York and the nurse that took its place, he's, you know, it's after he's seen her in black and white. So the whole time he's talking, he's setting up his camera and he's like putting on the lens and all of that. And so there's this, because we know that he's scene that she's about to die, and he's telling the story about death. And then just the way that he's kind of patiently putting together that camera, I think adds another kind of layer of,
dread. And
I don't think that he's being sinister, but it's just, it's darker,
Yeah, the way he's doing it so slowly and methodically. Just, yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. And then it takes the comment of, what do you mean? Oh, hang on a second. Do you think I'm going to die? And that's when the fear ramps up. But the fact that, it takes him that long, as you say, it tells him the story, the fact that, I didn't want to see his face. I figured if I saw it, he'd take me too. And, when he starts to talk all about that, and the fact that, he then says at the final part of that, he says, "You're very lucky, you know that." And the fact that lucky's been used again as the particular word is the one that kicks Scully off. It's like, well, hang on a second.
She realizes what he's doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because on first watch, when I watched this for the first time, a few weeks back, just to get ready for this, I tend to watch the episode a few weeks out of the recording and then watch it again nearer the time. I didn't kick on to that, but when I watched it again recently, I was like, oh, right. Because I thought the first time, I was like, well, that seems a bit like of a leap for Scully to take there. But it's the fact he used the word lucky, I think, is the trigger.
Yeah. Because he talked before about them, what was calling them lucky bastards, and then all these other things that he's indicated. But then also just saying the word lucky, I think, goes back to that idea of it, like there's no agency to it. There's no purpose. It's just, it happens to be this way, like random chance. It happens to be you,
Yeah. I think before we get to the finale part, we see that there's this ramping up of like the fact that, he's come in, and he cuffs him to the table. And then we get what I think is probably the weakest part of the show is the fact that you're in the dark room and the curtains are flapping around and stuff. I wasn't particularly fond of that. I don't know about you, Katie, but it felt a bit like it didn't really come together. It felt a bit rushed to me, and the figure coming out into the dark was clearly an FBI agent. It wasn't like, an out of phase figure or anything like that. So it was like a bit of white light, and then it comes in and then you clearly see him. I know that may be what Marlene was attesting to before about the, the kind of, aspect of, using the dark and the light and the reds and stuff like that. But for me, I felt it was a bit weak that there wasn't the amount of dread I was expecting. I don't know what you felt.
I think the dread is there. I don't really care for the use of that slow motion bit too much. It's a little bit corny, I think, to me, but like, we obviously can see it's an FBI agent. I think if they were probably in that dark room, it would just be so bright they wouldn't be able to see what it was. It's not obviously the shape of a Grim Reaper coming around the corner, to come in the room.
Right.
But, as Felix says, he's here. So, does he think he's going to see a figure come in? Does Scully think that? But, obviously it's Ritter, who obviously I think, does he, because he shoots Felix right through the camera. Does he think he's holding a gun? Or is that just a lucky shot? Or because you wouldn't really shoot at the gun of a person holding a gun. You would shoot, like a FBI kill shot, I would think. So
it's within his body, though, isn't it?
I liked the shot of it going right through that camera lens. Symbolically.
Right. And visually. Really well done.
The blood pouring out of it, yeah.
I agree about the slow motion, I think. I don't know, there's something when I watch it that I'm just not as frightened or whatever I'm supposed to be by that moment, but I hadn't really analyzed it. But I think that's it. Like the slow motion shot just doesn't add anything. I think that it kind of takes away from the tension in a way. And probably because we can see that it is an agent from the way he's standing and dressed and behaving and all of that, so I don't know if like having just bright white light would have been better. I don't know if anything would have been better other than maybe not having that slow motion aspect.
I think it's just a shot of him walking, his whole figure. I think if you maybe just saw a shape appear in the light, not with, the tracking his movement, I think that would have been a little bit more effective. But I mean, I always find slow motion to be kind of corny whenever it's used.
Yes.
Yeah. And
agree with that.
going back to tombs.
Yeah.
But anyway. But
At
anyway.
least it was funny with that.
So we get to the inevitable. You mentioned about the gunshot already going through the camera, but Marlene, what's your final take on this scene in the apartment with Scully's death and obviously then what Felix does? What's your take out from that?
Well, I really think that aside from what we just discussed with like the curtain pulling back in the figure, everything else visually is really striking because, you see Felix and then when he falls over, you see Scully standing against the wall and you can kind of see that little bullet hole in her shirt, but there's nothing else tremendously alarming about that. And then she slowly slides down the wall, so then you're horrified by it. But I think it wasn't just like the bullet went through him and then it hit her and she's like, oh, it was that sort of, she's stunned and we're kind of looking at her like, what's going to happen next? And then she slides down the wall and you see the blood on the wall.
Yeah, that blood trail.
And then coming out of her and her mouth. Yes. So it was just increasingly disturbing. And then Ritter is panicked and doesn't know what to do. But I mean, obviously he's trying to help. So he's not in that same, I don't know. It's an interesting concept, or not a concept, an interesting contrast in how they're all the characters are dealing with death, I guess, from Felix to Ritter to Scully. And then, when he's first Felix, I think it doesn't, and who knows, like, you don't know if it's like a mix of compassion for her or interest in getting himself out of life and taking her death or what it is. Like, I think that's good. I think it's good that his motives at the end are sort of ambiguous, because it's like, did he make a connection to Scully after all these years of apparently not having another connection to another human being? Is he trying to spare her death so that she can go on living because of like what he sees as her, appreciation of life? Or is it really that just that he is like clicking logically with him that this is an opportunity that he could take to die, through her? I guess I see it as a bit of both, but I like that you don't really get any sense of that, because at first he's reaching for another camera just to take her photo as she's dying. He gets his little, smaller camera to take a picture. And then it kind of, you see sort of this realization that and he asks Scully if she sees death and tells her to close her eyes. So I think there's something about that. Like he's, he is helping her in a way after all those times of not helping all these other people. And so I really like that aspect of it. And then just him taking her hand and sort of exhaling and dying.
I think that the very nature of what Mulder asks at the end, and we will touch upon this again in a couple of minutes, but the fact that he says, I think that death only looks for you once you seek its opposite. The fact that exactly what you've just said there, that there is all of a sudden, there is this kind of empathy towards Scully that, I think you're right with the ambivalent nature, or not the ambivalence, the kind of ambiguous nature of that scene. But I don't think it would have happened had he not had some empathy for Scully in that way, because he wasn't seeking it. He wasn't at that moment in time. He wasn't seeking it. There was genuine empathy for her. And then that's when he was like, look away from it. And then that's where, he was able to be released himself, because he, out of all this time of being so apathetic, that all he needs to do is have a bit of empathy, and he might well have got out of this, much earlier.
Yeah, because he could have done that with any other, victims that he had been near who were, on the verge of death. He didn't have that he hadn't made that kind of personal connection in a very long time. And I'm with you. I think it is a little ambiguous, because, if he did have a little bit of compassion for her, in his experience, what he was doing was now kind of cursing her with what his life had been. If he kind of believed in the sort of, the transfer of death and that. So I don't really know how to take it.
The type of person that that he said thinks that she is. Like, if she would, maybe he sees in her that she's the type of person that would also sacrifice herself for someone. So,
which is why she's not immortal.
Thank you.
No, she's not. Yeah.
And that ends the podcast. Thank you.
There you have it, folks.
No, but I mean, it's a beautiful scene. Just, if you're not trying to think too hard about it, just the visual of it, the color in black and white changing, and the way she
back.
She kind of gasps a little bit, and she's not really looking at anything, but when she closes her eyes and looks away and kind of trusts what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I visually, I think that's lovely.
Yeah, and especially the closing their eyes bit.
Yeah.
It's like when she starts to do it, it's like she's listening, she's understanding, she's not there. You know, she's definitely on the way out, and the fact that she hears that, and she's
like just a little bit is hanging on.
It's like the only thing she could do, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a great.
And the look of, that sort of brief moment of, relief on Felig's face that, he's finally free. And you can see just it's not happiness on his face, but it's release, it's relief.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a dangerous thing to play with from an actor's point of view, because you want to portray that that kind of emotion, but without looking cartoonish. Mm-hmm. So the fact that it's very so underplayed.
It's subtle, yeah,
because it's not like he's ecstatic, but it's not grotesque either. It is it's subtly done.
Yeah, and it's such a, as you say, it's an ambiguous thing that you could see it in so many different ways. But the fact that he, the fact he's not kind of like, what I think is that he's not searching for it. That's the whole reason. I think that it's more like a realization that he's stopped looking for it and it's come for him. Which is really nice. And obviously Mulder puts that to a point in the next scene. But obviously before he actually says, you're a lucky man, to Ritter, which is interesting. And I don't think it'd be amiss, as much as I don't particularly want to talk about it, but they do have a little bit of the hand touching with playing with the thumbs kind of thing, which I know goes around as a gif, which is probably Cathy Glinski's fault, if I'm being absolutely honest with you.
Yes, it's true.
I'll name check her.
That's true. Oh, Cathy.
She has all the gifts going on.
She's going to hear this and be like, oh, if not, there will be after she hears this podcast.
I'm pretty sure that she'll have a touching thread at some point. But yeah, it is a nice moment. It's an interesting moment.
I think it's very sweet, I have to say.
Yeah, I just think it's sweet.
I'm not a shipper. I think it's very sweet and caring. I like it a lot. I like the way that they did that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really nice scene as well. And I do like the open-endedness of this episode, with Mulder saying, it's that definitely looks for you once you think it's opposite. So, it's a really nice way to end the episode, really.
And Scully she's not going back on anything, but she says, she doesn't, when Mulder, and he seems, lighter and happier now, of course. And I have to say, I think that he did a good job of sort of changing his demeanor in that moment when he sits down with her. But he says that the doctor told him that she's making the fastest recovery that the doctor has ever seen. And then Scully is kind of melancholy, so she doesn't know how she entertains the thought, and people don't live forever. So she's kind of going back to that more rational skepticism, that she had before, or still trying to like puzzle out what's happened to her. Yeah, so I thought that was a really good line.
It's like she's not really even hearing Mulder. She's, still just within her own thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Trying to work it through.
Something I've not really taken from the episodes until you've just said that is that, Felig's, I think it said in some of the notes of the making of the episode that they wanted Felig to have this, like, recovery kind of, thing, that all the knife marks were the same size, so that they were all, quickly being fixed. He was mending himself as he was going. And I never really took it upon that, the fact that the doctors have said that Scully's making that, adjustment or actually is getting better a lot quicker than anyone's ever seen. The fact that that's something that's like played onto her because of where she was at that moment. Which obviously people will say that means that she's immortal, but she isn't. So.
I've never taken that as a literal. I mean, I think it's kind of uninteresting, and it doesn't make her life as interesting to, I never took it that way from Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose. And with this, because of what Mulder says, I don't particularly take it that way either. I mean, I think it's something that's
I think it's a nice
natural
debate. It's a nice debate to have.
It's definitely a debate.
It is. I just don't think it's a good literal debate, But with the fast recovery, I mean, it does suggest that some sort of capacity has been, like, she has, like, something has caused that fast recovery.
Maybe she's just got force powers.
That's right. So. That's the most reasonable explanation.
Yeah. She'll be in the latest TV show of Star Wars, because she's obviously a Disney princess now. So
she is not a Disney. Don't say that.
Right.
I don't accept that
to begin with. She's not a Disney princess.
No. I've hit a trigger point. I apologize. Right.
Yeah. But I was just going to say, I do, I mean, we've gone over this, but I love Mulder's last line. That's probably one of my favorite last lines in an episode. And I like her expression, after he says it. And I like that they just kind of leave it in that moment, and then they have the kind of piano music over the end, it works really well. I think that that comment, I mean, we've pretty much discussed what it means, but I think there's a lot to think about with it as well, and seeking death's opposite.
Yeah, no, it's almost like a life mantra as well, isn't it? So it's certainly an interesting one, and a great way to finish the episode. Katie, do you have any final thoughts on the episode before I go to Marlene and we hit the social media?
I just wanted to say Scully is not immortal. I agree with you there.
No.
I mean, the scene in Clyde Bruckman is so sweet, and obviously Darren Morgan didn't mean it that way. It's a a lovely little bonding between Bruckman and Scully. It's not a throwaway line, but it's a kindness from Bruckman. It's him connecting with her. Just the way he says it. No, you don't. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt your final point, but I wanted to add, I think it also with Bruckman and Scully, I think it is a sweet point, but it's also like he either doesn't want to or can't see her eventual end, which is another one of the same things of like, it's not determined. Like there's something that could intervene to, save her or whatever it is, and that's how and also just like that look of wonderment that he has on his face, Clyde Bruckman, that is when he says it. I was like, I don't take that to mean that she's physically immortal.
No, I think
it's just like he can't see her death.
Oh, see, I always took it to be that he could, but he doesn't want to put that burden on her.
Doesn't want to.
Yeah. That's how I always took it.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's kind of it. Just, it's that whole fact of like it's like that episode now has to become sort of a prequel to Tithonus, which I don't really like. I don't like having to force this on that episode. So, I prefer not to think of it that way.
Darren Morgan actually says that, I think, in somewhere where he gets asked this question a lot.
Yeah.
And he talks about the onus of the characters aren't his, that he's written his episode, and, he used to follow the show, but didn't follow it religiously. And he used to get asked this question a lot, and he was like, what are you talking about? It's,
yeah.
So the fact that you get to a point where, it's a TV show, the characters are what the characters are made of. It's Chris Carter's vision or whatever. But even if he left in season 7, like he could have, they would have changed these characters irrevocably anyway.
Oh, exactly. So any writer can take and do what they want.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing, and it may be proof of parallel universes. Any chance to get another Darren Morgan reference
it's not
in there?
Parallel universes. I also think too that I like this episode doesn't try and put science on this. It's not thinking like in a literal way. This has happened, so now obviously Scully is this. I also I like to think of it too that maybe if you're going to think of it in like death actually coming to get you. Maybe since it now has Fellig sort of, it's balanced again. So it's not going to continue this sort of, jumping from person to person, taking people's places. Maybe, since Fellig is now, in his rightful place where he should have been, that's kind of where it ends.
Okay, Marlene. So what's your final thoughts before we hit the social media?
I really liked this episode before, but I think that we've gotten even more out of it that makes me want to go back and watch it, again and think about these things. So I think it's only gone up in my estimation. And I think that that's sort of, along the lines of what Katie was saying and what we kind of talked about like not trying to put science or an explanation of how onto it when it's more of a, explanation of like why and meaning and characters and that type of thing. I don't know, to me, it makes it something that's going to be worth revisiting and sort of makes it grow stronger over the years rather than just being one that's fun to rewatch. So definitely, it's one that would only continue to move up in the echelon of my episodes, where there's some that kind of go back and forth, there's some that are steady, but this one is one I think that's like you can continue to mine the riches of it over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think that had I not done The Time Is Now, I think that I've already had the kind of review of it of late about how I have kind of like reevaluated this episode. But had I not done the Millennium podcast, I think I wouldn't have got as much out of it as I have done recently, because I do feel that there's Millennium aspects in it, and the science and the why is definitely two major points in that. And the fact, as I said earlier, that Vince Gilligan, wasn't involved in Millennium, and it would have been nice to see how that would have worked. But it wasn't to be, unfortunately. But this, for me, has gone up in my estimation. I think it's a wonderful piece of television and highly regarded, and I think it's great. So let's go and look into the social. Let's see how what other people have been saying on the Xcast basement, and we shall go and do that now. Okay, so we've had plenty of feedback on this one. First up, Michael Little says the first episode of season 6 with any sense or depth or complexity. We've been recording for 2 hours. I'm getting tired now. Or complexity. The idea of immortality warping someone's morals or sense of empathy is fascinating. Gillian Anderson and the late great Geoffrey Lewis do superb work here. Fellig is an interesting monster in his absolute apathy towards human life. Like a vampire that lives so long, he's utterly devoid of humanity. The scenes of him preying upon the dying by taking pictures is really disturbing, in a way most X-File monsters are not. I love the beat where Scully confronts Fellig about his complete indifference to human life. Fantastic episode. I think, Marlene, you mentioned before about that, the fact that, and Katie, I think it was yourself as well, about this idea of the photography aspect being kind of really quite haunting and quite scary, really.
Mm-hmm. I think it is. I mean, I think especially, I mean, it is still, but I think especially because this was early 1999, and it's getting, to the end of the era of the prominence of film photography. So, but it seems like an older episode as well, I think. Probably somewhat because of that, because of all of these like older cameras and the dark room and so forth. So there's the physical aspect of it and all the sensory details, and like what Katie was talking about with the flash charging and those sorts of things. But then there's also just this idea of imagery being haunting, and taking, you having these pictures and these images of something that once was but is no more. And then just sort of the feel that you have from some of the pictures too. So I really like the way that the photography and just in the practice of photography was used in this. Especially
black and white photography. It's so emotive, the images that you get. And also it's, the camera, it sort of acts like Fellig's hiding behind it. It's, humanity is there in front of him and he's hiding behind this machine that is just,
Yeah.
And then
he's shot through it at the end too. Yeah. So that's a great point.
Well, there's also Alicia Walker Scherer replies back to Michael and says that she agrees. And the use of black and white, as he observes those marked for death, highlights those feelings, the colour, joy and humanity gone from his life and soon theirs. So that in itself, the fact that the colour is drained from them is just also a nice touch with it, because, it's the fact that, we've got this conversation that we've been having about the kind of the thing to choose that when you're looking for its complete opposite, that Scully's talking about the vibrancy of life and that, the colour's being drained. I think that's a really good, astute point.
Yeah. It's like you can see their soul, leaving with the colour going with it.
Tony has been on as well. He says, one of my favourite episodes of the entire show. There is something both creepy and genuinely sad about Geoffrey Lewis's marvellous performance and how he bears the weight of he's using long words, Methuselah on his shoulders. It's also a great way of positioning Scully both in relation to working on the X-Files and how she copes with morality of the paranormal. Just haunting and weirdly beautiful stuff.
That's an interesting point about the morality of the paranormal as well.
Yeah.
I think.
Ronald Wilson, shameless plug for the old Volume 4 soundtrack, which includes 3 atmospheric cues from the Psychosophic. Oh, I can't speak anymore. This is not good. Rich Scully in Unpleasantville episode. Scully in Unpleasantville. Now, there's a film I haven't seen for a while. Christian Ponce, I love it. One of my favourites of the season. At the time, it was a very welcome return to the more classic tone and themes, which is something that we've touched upon. Ronald Wilson also says that even the deleted scenes are weirdly fascinating. This has been an 80-minute episode and I still would have been enthralled. Do you think it would have been able to be taken, Katie, over an 80-minute episode? Do you think it would have deserved that kind of treatment?
I don't know. I mean, there's definitely things you could flesh out, visually with, Scully and Fellig kind of learning more. With Scully, especially, you could drag that out. But I think I like that scene just in the dark room where it's, the whole last part of the episode. I think I like having it being contained like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. I think it was that, especially that from the moment that he walks down the street and sees Scully and they have the scenes in the apartment. I think that was the perfect length. That was just enough.
No, it becomes almost like a 2-person play.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it tells you everything about them that you really need to know, and the kind of just the way a very interesting natural conversation, I guess, would go between those two people. Mm-hmm. And it all seems to lead up to that too. So I don't think we need more information, that would come across for 80 minutes. I mean, I would see another episode of this type, I guess, but I don't know. I don't know what making it longer would necessarily add.
I think it's quite, as it is, it's quite contained in the framework in which it's being given. Maybe you could see, but I do think it's quite a slow-paced episode in the first place. So I would be a bit concerned about the pacing if we added more minutes to it. Anyway.
I don't feel like anything's missing. I don't feel like we're, in the dark about anything from what we have.
Yeah. Right.
Karen McKenna says, another of my all-time favourite episodes. I love Scully being a badass investigator here. Her beliefs challenged, but still she lets her instincts guide her towards the truth. Mulder gets to play background support, but his role is still fun and memorable. The visual and the music in the episode is distinct and hauntingly beautiful. I've always absolutely loved the way Scully's voice betrays her when she says the line, I don't believe you. Gillian just kills it here. Also, pimp slapping Scully is awesome. Oh yeah, because she slaps the pimp, doesn't she? Oh yeah, that was a nice little moment. Yeah. That was a nice little moment. Deana Ferreri says, I always wonder about Fellig's progression from when he first escaped death to resignation that he couldn't prevent anyone from dying to blatant indifference. There's a low-key enthusiasm in him for the photos that I find so creepy. The episode works for me because I am disgusted and horrified by Fellig, but still feel sorry for him. So do you have any major empathy towards him then, Katie?
I do, especially when he's, talking to Scully, telling his story. It kind of, you get a feeling of it's not just him lacking humanity. There's a reason why, and you can understand why it's happened. So yeah, I think Deana makes a good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think too, he just, whatever he's told to do, he does. He's goes along when they're asking him. I mean, he's not really, pleasant, but there's something that's just he kind of capitulates to whatever needs to be done. Like when he goes in for questioning, I think too, that sort of also he's just weary with life, and just kind of going along with that. Like you said, that one thing that he needs to do. And the only thing that he has left, following, like you said, the little, what was it? The little radio or the little police.
Yeah, the
police scanner. Yeah.
Thing. Scanner. Yeah. That's what I can think of. So I think that I would have some empathy for that. I think that she makes a good point.
Good. Andrew Levitt, the final comments for the day is Tithonus is one of the best episodes of season 6. with Vince Gilligan bringing the darkness of his season 4 efforts into play here. Felig's lack of compassion makes it an interesting character study, even more so because it's Scully rather than Mulder investigating. Like all Gilligan's best episodes, it's presented as a regular X-Files episode, but with a unique interpretation of the subject matter that makes viewers question their own beliefs. A classic episode. Yeah, totally agree with that. And that calls the episode to a close. So just leaves me to say thank you, Katie. Thank you, Marlene, for coming on and talking about it. It's been a wonderful couple of hours to talking about this episode. I think it's well deserved for the time we've given it. We could probably go on for another 3 hours talking about the deterministic nature of death and all kinds if we wanted to.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great discussion. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Excellent stuff.
Thank you for hosting.
Absolutely. Well, it's my pleasure, and it's good to have you both on. So if people wanted to hear or see more of you, where can people find you online? We'll start with Marlene first.
I would say the best place for X-File related discussion is in our XCast Basement group on Facebook. I read in there. I used to post quite frequently, and I'll probably get back to doing so again as I have more time, because there are some really interesting things in there, interesting discussions that'll take off. And then also some very fun polls for anybody that likes lists and voting on polls. And the X-Files, that is the place for you.
There's a lot of ranking going on.
And creative people. Yeah, doing that right now. So definitely check that out. There's room for everyone, I would say.
There is. I mean, I think the latest thing that's gone on there is about the release of the UFOs documentation by the CIA. That's the latest post that's been on there. And the latest poll is episode 20 of the poll. So there's plenty of polls to go around. Okay, then. So, Katie, where can people find you? And where are you generally lurking around? Are you in the basement as well? And
I am in the basement. I probably could post more, but whenever I think of it, it's not when I have time to actually write a lot. But I definitely enjoy reading. Yeah. I'm on Twitter. I just joined Instagram too, but I don't post that much, but just at Designer Doe.
Excellent. That's great stuff. You can find me on Twitter at rmuldrake. That's RMULDRAKE. I have a multitude of podcasts. You can find me on The Time Is Now, which will be wrapping up at time of recording. We're only a few episodes away from the finale of season 3. And we'll be talking next season about Millennium, the X-Files episode Millennium, which will be great. And you can find me there at The Time Is Now pod. I'm currently just about to start, which by the time this airs, it should be around the time that this is on. It's WandaVision. We're doing a podcast called Podcast 616. You can find it at Podcast 616. And I'll be covering WandaVision, the 9-part series on Disney+. You can also find me on the Red Dwarf podcast at Red Dwarf Pod, and that's Shipwrecked and Comatose. And then finally on the Star Trek Picard podcast at Jean-Luc Podard on Twitter as well. And we're currently looking at things like the new book that's just been released recently called The Darkest Veil by James Swallow. And we're talking about the Blu-ray, which is due to be coming out anytime soon as well. So plenty of me to go around. And of course, you'll find me on the XCast, as you all know. And you'll find me doing a host of few future episodes of season 6. And, it's good to be getting down to the double digits for the season. But yeah, thank you both again for joining me. It's now time for us to leave and, seek life, I should say, and try your best to have a happy and vibrant life. But, until next time, remember, as always, trust no one.
Elsewhere on We Made This. The Time Is Now, a Millennium podcast.
But no, I mean, I will say that Rise of the Machines also kind of argues against
Terminator 2, of course.
Back to where it was.
Like Rise of the Machines, then goes, maybe they're both right, and shrugs its shoulders. It's like, maybe you can prevent Judgment Day, but only for a little while. And it's like, that's not an argument. Pick a side. Pick a lane. You can either change the past or you can't. None of this wishy-washy. You can change it sometimes, but you can't really change it. So it all balances out. Yeah, no, pick a damn side.
Don't say the C word.
On the back of my right arm, I have a tattoo of Phil Collins It's the front cover of No Jacket Required.
This was the one that I expected you to pick, I'll be honest with you. Because it is my favourite of your tattoos.
Yeah. I mean, it was a tattoo I got as a joke. A lot of my tattoos that I've got, a lot of everything that I do is because it's a joke or if I think something's funny.
We Buy Records.
Eric Clapton and Van Morrison have released an anti-lockdown song. How do you think about this? Where does this sit on the shitometer?
I think it redefines the shitometer.
Right.
I think it's raising money for musicians who are affected by the lockdown and the lack of gigs, etc., which is a good thing.
Yep.
But then you see Van Morrison and Eric Clapton, a bad thing. So,
right.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, I love Van Morrison's music. I don't particularly like Eric Clapton's music. I quite like the 60s stuff. But they're a couple of whinging old men, aren't they? Old man babies complaining that they can't go and lick whoever they want.
Ooh.
I know, but that's what they're singing about. I think I haven't checked that. I assume that the lyrics are about.
You can take it as read that I haven't heard it.
It's not likely to have a banging donk on it, is it?
It's unlikely to have a banging donk.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. The Xcast and X-Files podcast was created by Tony Black and is produced and hosted by Carl Sweeney, Sarah Blair and Kurt North.
You can find the podcast on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the Xcast, and in our group, X-Files Basement, the Xcast podcast fan group, and on Instagram at the Xcast pod.
Don't forget, you can support the show by becoming a member on Patreon. Our patrons get early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes chats with our hosts and a thriving community of X-Files, and other premium interviews and specials. To find out more and subscribe, you can go to patreon.com/thexcast. That's patreon.com/thexcast.
We are also part of the We Made This podcast network, full of popular culture shows, including our Millennium series, The Time Is Now. You can find all of our shows at our website, wemadethispod.com, or via Twitter at wemadethispod.
Thanks for listening and keep watching the skies.